I arrived home fragile, but finally released from the hospital to find my sister Vivian and her husband Marcus loading our father's antique furniture onto a U-Haul truck. The mahogany desk where Dad taught me to read, the carved chair where he sat every evening, all of it disappearing into that truck, like my entire childhood was being erased. My legs trembled as I stood in the driveway, still weak from months of fighting a near-fatal infection. Vivian saw me and walked over, her face cold and emotionless. She shoved a document into my hands, the paper crinkling against my fingers. "Dad left everything to me," she said flatly. "Get out." I stared at the will in my shaking hands, trying to process her words. Everything. That couldn't be right. Dad had promised me the house, the vineyard, everything we had built together. "This is a mistake," I whispered. Marcus appeared beside Vivian, crossing his arms. "No mistake. The will is legal. You need to leave now." My eyes scanned the document quickly, my heart pounding. The signature looked strange, too shaky, and the witness names meant nothing to me. My name is Anya, and 3 months ago I nearly died. A simple infection turned into sepsis, landing me in intensive care for weeks, then months of slow recovery. During that time, my father was my lifeline, visiting when he could, promising me that everything would be okay, that our home would be waiting. He had always been there for me, especially after Mom left when I was 12. I was the one who stayed, who helped him build the vineyard into something successful, who sat with him during his own health scares. Vivian had moved away years ago, only visiting on holidays, always asking about money, but never about Dad himself. Now I sat in my car parked down the street, studying the will more carefully. The document was dated just 3 days before Dad's death. 3 days. My hands went cold. Dad had been in the hospital then, heavily medicated after his stroke. I remembered visiting him that day. He could barely speak, could barely hold a pen. How could he have signed this? The signature looked wrong, the letters too loose and wandering. And those witness names, I had never heard of them before. That evening, I confronted Vivian at the house. She answered the door with a glass of wine in her hand, looking completely comfortable in what should have been my home. "You need to explain this, Will," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. She leaned against the doorframe, studying her nails. "There's nothing to explain. You were gone, Anya. Dad needed someone reliable, someone who could actually be there for him." Her words cut deep, but I pushed through. "I was in the hospital fighting for my life." "And I was here," she interrupted, "taking care of everything. Dad realized who really mattered." I noticed the family photos were already gone from the walls, replaced with blank spaces. "Where's Mom's jewelry box?" I asked suddenly, remembering the small collection Dad had saved for me. Vivian smiled coldly. "Sold it. Got a good price, too." My chest tightened. That jewelry box held the only things I had left for my mother. "You had no right." "I had every right," she said. "The house is already on the market. You should find somewhere else to stay." She closed the door in my face. The next morning, I called Mr. Chenault, Dad's longtime lawyer. He had been handling our family's legal matters for 20 years, always thorough and careful. The phone rang 3 times before he answered. "Anya," he said, his voice strange and tight. "I've been trying to reach you, but they wouldn't let me into the hospital." "They?" I asked. "Who?" He hesitated. "I need to see you in person. Can you come to my office today? It's important." Something in his tone made my stomach drop. "Mr. Chenault, did you prepare that will?" "The one Vivian showed me." The silence stretched too long. "Please come see me," he said finally. 2 o'clock. "Don't tell anyone you're coming." He hung up before I could ask more questions. I sat staring at my phone, my heart racing. Mr. Chenault's non-committal response confirmed what my gut had been screaming since yesterday. Something was deeply wrong with that will. A man who had been meticulous about every legal document for 2 decades suddenly sounded cagey and nervous. I looked at the clock. 5 hours until our meeting. 5 hours to figure out what Dad might have left behind, some clue or protection I didn't know about. I rushed back to Dad's house while Vivian and Marcus were out. Using my old key, I slipped into his study, the room where he had spent countless evenings managing the vineyard's accounts. I went straight to his desk drawer where he always kept his safe deposit box key. Empty. My hands rifled through papers, folders, anything that might help. Then I remembered something Dad had said a year ago during one of our late-night talks. I have a fail-safe, Anya, just in case. At the time, I thought he was being paranoid. Now those words felt like a lifeline. I searched everywhere, growing more desperate. Finally, I opened his antique grandfather clock, the one his father had given him. Inside, tucked behind the pendulum, was a small folded note in Dad's handwriting. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. The message was brief. The vineyard's original vintage year. That was it. No explanation, no context. But it had to mean something. Our vineyard's first successful harvest was 1995. Dad always called it his proudest achievement. The note wasn't about the house safe. It was about the vineyard itself. At 2 o'clock exactly, I sat across from Mr. Chenault in his wood-paneled office. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. He poured 2 glasses of water with shaking hands before finally speaking. That will Vivian showed you, he began carefully. I was pressured to execute it. My heart stopped. Pressured how? He pulled out a folder, spreading documents across his desk. Your father was barely lucid that day. He'd had a major stroke 3 days before his death. Vivian and Marcus came to me with that document, insisting it was your father's final wish. They had 2 witnesses, medical aides I'd never seen before. But you notarized it anyway? I couldn't keep the accusation from my voice. He looked pained. I shouldn't have, but Vivian threatened to report me for malpractice, claimed I'd mishandled previous documents. She had Marcus there, intimidating me. I was weak, and I'm sorry. He slid a business card across the desk. But I've been investigating them quietly. The burden of proof is high to overturn a will, but I believe we can do it. Finally, someone on my side. Someone who knew the truth. What do we need? I asked. I returned to the house that afternoon to collect some of my belongings that Vivian hadn't thrown away yet. She wasn't home, but Marcus was there, pacing in the garden while talking on his phone. I stayed quiet near the kitchen window, listening. No, you don't understand, Marcus said, his voice tight with panic. We needed that money weeks ago. The loan is already in default. My breath caught. What loan? The vineyard's assets are the collateral, he continued. If we don't pay by next month, we lose everything. That's why we had to move fast on the old man. The old man. He meant my father. The will is solid, Marcus said. Nobody can prove anything. Just give us 2 more weeks. He hung up and I ducked back, my mind racing. This wasn't just about inheritance. They had taken out a loan using Dad's vineyard as collateral, probably forging his signature for that too. They needed him dead and they needed me out of the picture. This was premeditated, calculated theft. And they had been planning it for a while, probably since before I got sick. Mr. Chenault called me the next day with troubling news. Those 2 witnesses on the will, he said. They were temporary medical aides, highly paid for just a few days of work. One of them, Ms. Perez, has mysteriously quit her job and moved out of state. I gripped the phone tighter. Can we track her down? I'm trying, he said. But Vivian and Marcus covered their tracks well. Everything looks legitimate on paper. The witnesses were real medical professionals, licensed and everything. It's going to be hard to prove they were paid to lie. I felt my hope slipping. What about the loan Marcus mentioned? I'm investigating that too, Mr. Chenault replied. But without concrete evidence, it's just your word against theirs. After we hung up, I sat in my tiny rental apartment, feeling the walls close in. Vivian had erased me from the house, sold my mother's jewelry, and was about to sell the property itself. She had thought of everything, had made the will look completely legal. Unless I found that fail-safe Dad mentioned, I might lose everything. The vineyard's original vintage year. That clue was all I had left. 3 days later, Vivian showed up at my rental apartment. I saw her through the peephole, dressed in expensive clothes I knew she couldn't afford on her own. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice suddenly softer, almost kind. I stepped aside reluctantly. She walked in and sat on my worn couch, looking around at my small space with barely hidden satisfaction. "This is hard for both of us," she began. "Losing Dad, fighting over his things. We're sisters, Anya. We shouldn't be destroying each other." I stayed silent, waiting. "I'm willing to offer you a settlement," she continued, pulling out a paper. $50,000. You drop the legal challenge, sign away any claims, and we can both move forward. I looked at the number. $50,000 for a vineyard worth millions, for the house, for everything Dad built. It was an insult. Why would you offer me anything if the will is legitimate? I asked calmly. Her smile faltered. "I'm trying to be kind, to keep our family together." "You sold Mom's jewelry," I said. "You erased me from that house. Now you're offering me pocket change." She stood up, her mask slipping. "Fine, be stubborn, but you won't win this." After she left, I felt oddly hopeful. Her desperation to settle meant she knew the will wouldn't hold up under real scrutiny. I drove to the vineyard the next morning, parking near the main building. Oscar, the aging vineyard manager who had worked for Dad for 30 years, was checking the irrigation systems. I approached him casually, pretending I was just visiting. "Oscar, can I ask you something?" He looked up, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Anya, I heard you were out of the hospital. How are you feeling?" "Better," I said. "I wanted to ask about Dad's last few months. Did he seem worried about anything?" Oscar's expression grew thoughtful. "Actually, yes. About 6 months ago, your father came to see me, specifically. Asked me to guard the 1995 vintage section particularly carefully." My heart jumped. The original vintage year. "Did he say why?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Not exactly," Oscar replied, "but he was very specific. Said nobody but you should access that area. He even changed the lock himself, which was strange." I felt pieces clicking together. "Can you show me that section?" Oscar hesitated. "Your sister said the vineyard is off limits now. She's the owner." "Just a quick look," I pressed. "For Dad's memory." After a moment, he nodded and led me toward the wine cellars. That evening, Mr. Chenault called with more information about Marcus. "I found the loan documents," he said, excitement in his voice. Marcus's business was facing bankruptcy. He took out an emergency loan 6 weeks before your father's death, using the vineyard as collateral. "Can we use this in court?" I asked. "Absolutely," he replied. "It establishes motive. They didn't just want the inheritance. They desperately needed it to prevent financial collapse. Marcus was drowning in debt from bad investments." He paused. "There's more. The loan was approved based on documents claiming Marcus had partial ownership of the vineyard. But your father never signed anything giving him that ownership." "So they forged those documents too," I said. "Most likely," Mr. Chenault agreed. "They've been planning this for months, probably since they realized how bad Marcus's financial situation was. Your illness gave them the perfect opportunity." I felt sick. While I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed, my sister and her husband were plotting to steal everything Dad had worked for. They had used his grief over my condition, his own declining health, to manipulate and forge their way into his estate. Late that night, I met Oscar at the vineyard. He had agreed to help me access the 1995 vintage section discreetly. The wine cellar was cool and dark, lit only by our flashlights. Row after row of bottles lined the walls, each labeled and dated. Oscar led me to a special corner, a locked compartment separate from the others. Your father installed this lock himself, Oscar explained. Never told me why. I examined the lock. It was old-fashioned, requiring a key I didn't have. But I noticed something, small initials carved into the wood beneath it. My initials. Dad had meant this for me. Using a thin piece of metal from my keychain, I carefully worked the lock. It took several minutes, but finally it clicked open. Inside were 6 bottles of the 1995 vintage, carefully preserved. But beneath them, hidden in the sawdust at the bottom, was something else. An old leather-bound portfolio, dusty and worn. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. The portfolio had its own small lock and my heart sank. But when I looked closer, I recognized it. It was the same type of lock Dad had used on his personal diary when I was a child. I knew the combination. I sat on the cellar floor, the portfolio in my lap, and worked the combination lock. It was based on a code from Dad's favorite childhood story, the one he used to tell me every night. 3 numbers that meant everything to us. The lock clicked open. Inside the portfolio were legal documents, official and notarized. At the top was a title in bold letters, Irrevocable Trust. My hands shook as I read through it. The document was dated 10 years ago, long before Dad got sick, long before any of this nightmare began. It placed the entire vineyard, the house, and all associated assets into a trust. And the sole beneficiary was me. Not Vivian. Just me. There were signatures, witness statements, everything legally binding and proper. An irrevocable trust meant it couldn't be changed or dissolved, not even by a will. It superseded everything. Dad had anticipated this exact betrayal a decade ago. He had seen something in Vivian, some warning sign, and had protected me from it. Tears ran down my face as I read his handwritten note attached to the documents. Anya, if you're reading this, then my fears came true. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you in person, but I made sure you'd be protected in law. The vineyard is yours. It always was. The next morning, I met with Mr. Chenault and showed him the trust documents. His eyes widened as he read through them. This changes everything, he said, a smile spreading across his face. An irrevocable trust supersedes any will. Vivian's forged document is completely irrelevant. So I just show this to the judge, and it's over. I asked. He held up a hand. Not quite. I have a better strategy. We keep this hidden for now. Instead, we file an aggressive lawsuit based on the forgery evidence we already have. Force them into depositions. Make them defend themselves publicly. Why wait? I asked, confused. Because right now, Vivian thinks she's won. She'll be overconfident, careless. She'll make mistakes in her deposition. And when she realizes we have the trust, when we reveal it in court at the perfect moment, he smiled. That's when her whole world collapses. I understood his strategy. Let Vivian dig her own grave first. Let her commit perjury, trying to defend the fake will. Then hit her with proof that none of it mattered anyway. It was perfect. We filed the lawsuit that afternoon, alleging forgery and fraud. Within hours, Vivian called me, laughing. You actually think you can win? My lawyers will crush you. I let her think that. Soon enough, she'd learn the truth. Mr. Chenault worked tirelessly to track down the witness who had signed Vivian's forged will. 2 weeks after we filed the lawsuit, he finally located Ms. Perez. She was hiding at her cousin's house in another state, clearly scared. She's agreed to talk, Mr. Chenault told me over the phone, but only if we guarantee her immunity and protection. She's terrified of what Vivian might do. We arranged a video call with Ms. Perez, with Mr. Chenault recording everything for legal purposes. The woman who appeared on screen looked exhausted and afraid. I'm sorry, she began immediately. I never should have done it. Tell us exactly what happened, Mr. Chenault said gently. Ms. Perez took a shaky breath. Vivian hired me and another aide through a temp agency. She paid us each $5,000 cash. She told us her father wanted to update his will, but he was too weak to do it properly. She had us sign as witnesses, but... She paused. But what? I prompted. The paper was blank when we signed it, she admitted. Vivian said she'd fill in the details later, that it was normal procedure. I knew it wasn't right, but I needed the money. There it was. Proof of the forgery, on video, from one of the witnesses herself. The deposition day arrived. Marcus sat across the table from us in a conference room, his lawyer beside him. He looked confident at first, almost smug. Mr. Chenault started with simple questions about Marcus's relationship with my father, with the vineyard, establishing timeline and context. Then he shifted direction. Mr. Marcus, can you describe your financial situation 6 months before your father-in-law's death? Marcus's confidence flickered. I don't see how that's relevant. Please answer the question, Mr. Chenault pressed. My business was going through a rough patch, Marcus admitted carefully. Define rough patch, Mr. Chenault said, sliding documents across the table. Were you, in fact, facing bankruptcy? And did you take out an emergency loan using your father-in-law's vineyard as collateral? Marcus's face went pale. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. We needed temporary help, Marcus stammered. Did you have permission to use the vineyard as collateral? Mr. Chenault asked. Did you have any legal ownership of that property? My wife was going to inherit it, Marcus said, his voice rising. So you assumed future inheritance gave you current ownership rights? Mr. Chenault's tone was sharp now. You forged documents claiming partial ownership to secure that loan, didn't you? Marcus snapped. We didn't forge anything. The old man was dying anyway. We just moved things along. The room went silent. His lawyer looked horrified. Marcus had just confessed to financial fraud on the record. After Marcus's disastrous deposition, Vivian became reckless. She called me repeatedly, leaving angry voicemails. Then one day, she confronted me outside the courthouse where we had another hearing scheduled. You're destroying our family, she screamed, drawing attention from people nearby. Dad would be ashamed of you. I stayed calm, my phone recording in my pocket. I'm just asking for the truth. The truth? She laughed bitterly. The truth is you were never there. You abandoned him when he needed you most. You don't deserve anything he built. I was in the hospital fighting a deadly infection, I said quietly, and you exploited Dad's grief to steal from him. I didn't steal anything. Her voice was shrill now. He wanted me to have it. He told me so. A bystander had their phone out, recording her outburst. Vivian didn't notice or didn't care. You're pathetic, she continued. You always were. Dad only kept you around out of pity. Her mask had completely fallen away. The careful, composed sister who had shown up at my apartment offering settlements was gone. This was the real Vivian, desperate and cruel. The video of her outburst would be powerful evidence of her true character in court. Mr. Chenault scheduled one more crucial deposition, this time with the bank manager who had processed Marcus's loan. The woman sat primly in her chair, professional and cooperative. Can you describe the consultation that took place 3 months before Mr. Wynn's death? Mr. Chenault asked. She nodded. Marcus and Vivian came to see me. They asked specific questions about the trust established by Mr. Wynn. My heart stopped. What kind of questions? Mr. Chenault prompted. They wanted to know if the trust could be dissolved or overridden by a will, she explained. I told them that an irrevocable trust supersedes any subsequent will. They seemed very upset by this information. So they knew. They had known about the trust and had tried to find a way around it. When they couldn't legally dissolve it, they had created the fake will anyway, hoping nobody would discover the trust's existence. Did they ask anything else? Mr. Chenault asked. Yes, the banker said. They asked if anyone would automatically check for for existing trusts during probate. I explained that it depends on whether the executor discloses all assets. If nobody mentions the trust, it might be overlooked. They had gambled that I wouldn't know about the trust, that Dad had never told me. They almost won that bet. The final hearing arrived. I sat beside Mr. Chenault in the courtroom, the trust documents in his briefcase. Vivian sat across the aisle with her lawyers, looking confident despite everything that had happened. She had worn an expensive black dress, playing the grieving daughter role. The judge entered and we all stood. She was an older woman with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back severely. She reviewed the case file briefly. "This is a dispute over the estate of Mr. Wynne," she began. "Ms. Vivian claims the latest will is valid. Ms. Anya contests its authenticity." Vivian's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we maintain that the will was properly executed with appropriate witnesses. Ms. Anya's claims are based on emotion, not evidence." Mr. Chenault stood slowly. "Your Honor, if I may interrupt, we have substantial evidence of forgery, coercion, and fraud. But more importantly, we have a document that makes this entire dispute irrelevant." He opened his briefcase and pulled out the trust documents. 10 years ago, Mr. Wynne established an irrevocable trust placing all his assets under protection. The sole beneficiary is Ms. Anya. I watched Vivian's face as Mr. Chenault explained. Her confident smile faded. Then her face went completely white, all color draining away as she understood what this meant. The judge took the trust documents and examined them carefully, her reading glasses perched on her nose. The courtroom was silent except for the rustling of papers. Vivian whispered urgently to her lawyers, who looked equally shocked. "These documents appear authentic," the judge said finally. "Properly notarized, legally filed 10 years ago." She looked up at Vivian's lawyers. "Do you contest the validity of this trust?" They huddled together, frantically discussing options. Finally, Vivian's lead lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we were unaware of this trust's existence. We need time to verify." "The trust is registered with the county," Mr. Chenault interrupted. "Public record. A simple search would have revealed it." The judge's expression hardened. "So this entire proceeding was unnecessary. The trust supersedes any will, making your client's document irrelevant even if it were legitimate." She paused, looking at Marcus's deposition transcript. "Furthermore, based on the evidence of forgery, false witness testimony, and financial coercion presented here, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation." Vivian made a small sound like a wounded animal. "Your Honor, I'm not interested in excuses," the judge cut her off. "The estate legally belongs to Ms. Anya, as it has for 10 years. This court rules in her favor." By the next morning, the story had spread. A local reporter who had been in the courtroom wrote an article about the case, Sisters' elaborate fraud exposed in Vineyard Inheritance Battle. It went viral locally, shared across social media and community groups. Vivian and Marcus's photos appeared alongside details of the forged will, the fake witnesses, and Marcus's bankruptcy scheme. They were hounded by reporters outside their apartment. I saw footage on the evening news of Vivian hiding her face, running from cameras. People from the community recognized them at the grocery store, in restaurants. Their reputation was publicly destroyed. Marcus's remaining business clients dropped him. Vivian's friends stopped returning her calls. The humiliation they had tried to inflict on me, making me homeless and erasing my existence, had returned to them multiplied. I felt no joy in their suffering, but I felt justice. They had gambled everything on a cruel scheme and lost spectacularly. The district attorney's office formally opened an investigation. Mr. Chenault kept me updated on the progress. Criminal charges were likely for both of them: fraud, forgery, possibly elder abuse for how they had manipulated Dad in his final days. I stood in Dad's office at the Vineyard for the first time as its legal owner. The room looked exactly as he had left it, down to the half-finished crossword puzzle on his desk. Oscar had preserved everything perfectly. Through the window, I could see rows of grapevines stretching toward the hills, the afternoon sun casting golden light across them. This was mine now, truly and legally mine. I hired Oscar officially as head manager and began making plans. The vineyard had been neglected during the legal battle, but it wasn't too late to save this year's harvest. We would need to modernize some equipment, hire more staff, rebuild relationships with distributors Vivian had alienated. While organizing Dad's desk, I found one more surprise. A sealed envelope taped to the underside of the bottom drawer, with my name written across it in his handwriting. Inside was a letter, dated the same day he created the trust 10 years ago. "My dearest Anya," it began, "if you're reading this, then everything went according to plan. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you in person, but I made sure the law would protect you instead. I always knew you were the one who truly loved this vineyard, who understood what it meant. You are my legacy, not the land or the money. Be happy, be strong. I love you always. Dad." 1 week later, Vivian showed up at the vineyard. Security called me from the gate, asking if they should let her in. I almost said no, but curiosity made me agree. She pulled up in a rental car, no longer driving the luxury vehicle she had bought with Dad's money. She looked terrible, her hair unwashed, her expensive clothes wrinkled. When I met her at the main building, she started screaming immediately. "You ruined my life," she shouted. "We're broke. Marcus might go to jail. Everyone hates us. Are you happy now?" I stayed completely calm, my voice steady. "I didn't ruin your life, Vivian. You made choices. You chose to forge documents, to manipulate Dad when he was dying, to try to steal everything." "I deserved that inheritance," she screamed. "I'm the older sister. I took care of this family when you were off at college." "You left," I corrected. "You chose to move away, to only visit on holidays. I was here working beside Dad, building this vineyard into what it is." She lunged toward me, and security moved forward. I pulled out a folded paper from my pocket. "This is a restraining order. You're not allowed within 500 feet of this property or my residence." Her face twisted with rage and desperation. Security escorted her off the property while she screamed threats and insults. I watched her leave, feeling nothing but peace. 6 months passed. I hosted a charity wine tasting event at the vineyard, our first major public event since taking over. The turnout was incredible, over 200 people from the community and wine industry. Local restaurants featured our wines. Critics praised the new direction I was taking the vineyard. I stood on the terrace overlooking the vines, watching guests mingle and laugh. Oscar approached with a satisfied smile. "Your father would be proud," he said. "You've brought this place back to life." My aunt arrived late, pulling me aside with news. "I thought you should know," she said quietly. "Marcus fled the state. There's a warrant out for his arrest, and Vivian is being formally charged with fraud and forgery. The trial is set for next month." I nodded, absorbing the information. Their consequences were catching up with them, as they should. But I wasn't consumed by revenge anymore. I was too busy building something beautiful. The vineyard was thriving. I was healthy, happy, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me and Dad's legacy. My success, my dignity, my peace, those were the ultimate revenge. I didn't need to see them suffer. I just needed to see myself succeed, and I had. That evening, after the last guests left, I sat with Mr. Chunault and Oscar on the terrace. I had opened one of the 1995 vintage bottles, the original vintage Dad had protected so carefully. We raised our glasses as the sun set over the vineyard. "To your father," Mr. Chunault said. "To protection and wisdom." "To new beginnings," Oscar added. I sipped the wine, tasting the history in it. This vintage represented everything Dad had built from nothing, the same way I was rebuilding now. We discussed plans for a new specialty blend, something that would honor Dad's memory while pushing the vineyard into the future. I had invited both of them to become partners in certain aspects of the business. They weren't just employees or consultants anymore. They were family, chosen family who had stood by me when my blood family betrayed me. Looking out over the land, I felt Dad's presence somehow, in the vines he had planted, in the soil he had tended. His legacy wasn't just the property. It was the lesson he taught me, that real protection comes from preparation, that love means safeguarding those you care about, that dignity and truth always win in the end. I had one more than an inheritance. I had built a life,